Welcome to the TecStack podcast. TecStack is looking at beyond now, what that means to you and your profession, and how best to be equipped to ride the wave of converging technologies rather than be dumped by it. At TecStack, we provide trailblazing education, training, events, research and advisory services to industry professionals, organisations and governing bodies. Our focus is on the impact and the exponential implications of emerging technologies as they converge on various sectors, as well as unprecedented opportunities arising from them. We have a strong focal point on the legal, proptech and fintech fields, which incorporates but isn't exclusive to blockchain technology. Hi, my name is Abiti Catherine Pass and you're watching the TecStack podcast. I'm here today with Dorian of Buildsort. Welcome.
Thank you.
And what we're discussing today is the future of law. 10 things you should know about smart contracts. Hey Chris.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about Buildsort before we start?
Okay, so Buildsort is a smart legal contracts platform. I guess we'll get into what that actually means shortly, but we're trying to help the construction industry automate their obligations in contracts, and blockchain kind of fits that bill with the smart contracts that come with it. So it could revolutionise the industry. We're hoping that we can see some massive gains just by automating these contracts and having people work together a bit more collaboratively.
So you're bringing together building community as well as making it easier to sort of fast track or automate the contract service?
So we're talking about claims, entering into contracts, the tender processes, all of those kind of things. And they can be very tedious, and there's a big group of people that actually are involved in making all that happen. So it can add a huge percentage onto the actual build costs of construction.
Okay, well let's get started. For starters, can you tell us a little bit about what is blockchain and how does it work?
So blockchain is basically a database, a shared database between all the different individuals. So what you do is you take some data, and what you can do is you can chain it together. So you have with what's called a hash function. Now a hash function is kind of a one-way algorithm to turn a block of data into a string. So when you first have the first data, you take a hash of that and you enter that in with the second lot of data that comes through. So what that means is it can't be changed at some point in the future, because someone else could come along and audit that data and make sure that they're all seeing the exact same picture. And that's done between lots of different intermediaries.
And so, for example, in the case of the building industry, which is what we're referring to in terms of legal contracts, the data would be data obviously entered by professionals in relation to sort of building contracts.
Yeah, so for instance, when a claim comes up, you'd see exactly what they're claiming, and that would be shared between all the different parties. If there was a change to the contract, which we call variation, so an extra scope, if someone wants to put another floor on their building or something like that, that kind of thing could be immutable. So we have a copy of that from what was agreed in the beginning. Now we can see what's changed. So it kind of helps with that, reduce all that ambiguity.
And having that transparency.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
But it also has a lot of other things that, because of this immutability and the sharing, you've got a whole lot of things that you can do. So you can reduce all the intermediaries. So in the case of banking, you can get rid of the whole banking. That's what Bitcoin has done. Mm-hmm. You can tokenize things. When we say tokenize, that's kind of like almost like shares or unit trusts, things like that. So that can be used in proptech. You've got smart contracts. So things can automate based on other data that's entered in at some point in the future, and payments. So there's some big opportunities.
And so why would you use blockchain in particular for legal contracts or for smart legal contracts, which we'll get onto a little bit further? Because I was recently overhearing some legal professionals saying that the software they've been using for the last 20 years is just fine. So why do we need to update the apple, so to speak?
The disruption is not going to come from the legal area. This is going to come outside of them. So it's not going to be them that is doing the disruption. So it's going to be their clients that are going to be asking for it. So, for instance, in the construction space where I'm involved, it's going to be those contractors that are going to want it, so they can automate what's happening in their industry. So it's a way of, in terms of the legal, I mean, I know we're looking at law and we're looking at construction, but obviously they marry together. But in order for them to be able to sync together and continue to work effectively together, everybody needs to upgrade yes, exactly.
to the latest information. All right. Can you talk a little bit about the history of smart contracts?
So he came from Nick Zavos. He invented it, I think it was back in the 80s.
Wow.
So he came up with what was called BitGold at the time. It was kind of like a very early Ethereum platform. Didn't really go anywhere. So this was way before Bitcoin even started. And it had the idea of, if this happened and that happened, then pay. So that's kind of the real, that was the very early beginnings. And his work has been quoted in Bitcoin white paper. It's also involved in Ethereum. That's where they got most of their ideas from.
Ah, that's really enlightening.
Yes.
It's a bit like Dr. Scott Stornetta was the co-founder of blockchain, but everybody thinks that Satoshi Nakamoto or whoever invented Bitcoin was the founder of blockchain. So it's a bit of it's good to mention the originators, the origins. So in terms of smart legal platforms, first of all, I want to ask you, what's the difference between a smart contract and a smart legal contract? And then secondly, I wanted to ask you, what kind of platforms do you need to create smart legal contracts?
Yeah, so, taking the first one, what is a smart contract versus a smart legal contract? A smart contract is just something that runs on the blockchain. It's kind of like a program. So this was the whole idea of if then this, then maybe pay or provide those tokens or that kind of thing. It's not legal in the sense that it's been formed in a legal sense. It's going to be very difficult to also dispute in the future because the legal industry is not set up to deal with them. So the smart legal contract is something a little bit closer to what we've been dealing with in the past. So what you have is your standard legal contract that most lawyers can see, and that would be what is disputed if there was ever a problem. Then you have sitting behind that some code. Now the code automates the actions of that contract. For instance, when that claims come through, how they assess them, maybe if there was delays in a contract, in a construction contract, there could be liquidated damages, how they assess those kind of things. But those smart contracts, they need data coming in, so they need a lot of information, so it comes from what's called an oracle. An oracle is just something that can add information to the blockchain, which can automate some of these.
Is that like an app or something that's built in or a plugin?
Well, oracles come in many different forms. It could be IoT, so there could be sensors. So in the case of shipping and things like that, they put temperature sensors and maybe GPS, so they make sure.
So it's kind of like an information feedback system.
And then these contracts can execute based on the data that's coming through from them.
And so that data is unbiased, if it's a sensor or something like that, or is it?
This is one of the oracle. This is what's called the oracle problem. So you need to have a trusted source of information,
Right.
because they can be tampered with, and that could help, be problems with what's happening. So the oracle needs to be trusted and untamperable. Now, the oracle could also just be a human that's entering in data. So in that case, you need to be able to have double checks.
You need a clause for human folly or human mistakes.
Well,
yeah.
in most cases, so with what we're doing in construction, most of that would be human entered.
Data entry.
However, you want to enter that data in the most honest way, because you start getting into fraud and those kind of things as well. So,
all right, so that would be one of the challenges. All right. And in order to create a smart legal contract?
So there's a couple of platforms out there.
I'm not letting you drink your coffee.
So there's a couple of platforms out there. So there's one called Accord, which has just been introduced into the Hyperledger consortium.
What's the Hyperledger consortium?
Okay.
You need to speak English.
Okay.
No, really. We just need to unpack some of those things.
Okay,
It's
so
not necessarily
there's
given that people know.
Hyperledger is part of the, we're going down a rabbit hole now,
Yeah.
part of the Linux Foundation.
Oh, so it's part of Linux.
It's kind of an open source community.
Okay.
And there's a lot of big companies in there that contribute, so Intel, IBM,
Okay.
a couple of big, lots of big players in there.
All right. So, say for example, you were talking about Accord, and that is that's a platform that a smart legal contract can be built on, and it's part of the Hyperledger
Yes. So
Foundation.
it can be difficult to use. You need to know how to code. There's another one called Open Law, which is based on Ethereum, and is run by consensus. That is also very much you need to code. Both of these are pretty much the same, as in they have the legal contractuality along with the being able to code. There's one called Monax, which is a little bit more drag and drop. So that's
Sounds more like my style.
And of course Buildsort. So Buildsort is, once again, it's similar to Monax. We've got a drag and drop workflow to build these contracts, which make it a little bit easier for professionals to be able to see what's going on, and also it helps with when the contract's being executed, so you can see where you are in the workflow.
So then Buildsort doesn't have the coding skills. You don't need to have coding skills in order to.
Coding skills.
So it's a little bit like the MailChimp. Whoops, free plug. The MailChimp of the CRM world. Okay, cool. Interesting. And so say, for example, like you said, that professionals don't need to have those coding skills, but they're obviously building professionals with their own set of skills. But that means that, say I'm highly unlikely, but I'm a professional in the building industry, I can go in there potentially and create my own smart legal contract.
So yes, most of contracts in construction are what we call standard form contracts. The standard form contracts are you buy them from HIA or Standards Australia, that kind of thing. So we're templating a lot of those.
Oh, okay.
But you also need the ability, not all contracts go through unedited.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that like to change them for
You need to be
whatever
able to
reason.
customise
You
them,
need to
yeah?
be able to customise them, that's right. So,
Okay. So that's available through Buildsort too.
that's right.
And so is that, I'm just interested now, but is that a service that you provide at Buildsort in educating people, or is that something that, like is it a DIY learning process for professionals?
Yeah, it will be a DIY learning process. We eventually will have some kind of, we will give some help in that.
So Chris, we've looked at we looked at 4 different platforms that you can create a smart legal contract, but how do they actually work?
So, like I said, that was where the Oracle comes in. The Oracle feeds data.
Okay.
And it's based on, if this happens, what happens here. So you need to have a connection. So the blockchain has no connection to the real world, and the oracles are the only thing that do that. So with those oracle information coming through, like I said, that could be IoT, could be a human, or it could be, could even be like a web service. So things like what the weather is, what the stock prices are doing, that kind of thing.
And I've also heard oracles used in relation to reputation reputation status on the blockchain. You know, so good players, unfair players, that sort of thing. So I guess it's related. It's that data feeding into the blockchain. Is there anything else other than oracles that are related to smart contracts in order for them to work? I mean, there's the coding behind. Oh, I just did want to mention, so you mentioned that, say for example, we've got a legal contract, we get the data feeding in and the data says X, in which case the smart contract or the smart legal contract automatically goes down that road, so to speak.
Exactly, yeah.
If it's a no, then it goes down another road. So it's taking that emotion out. It's taking the legal battles and that sort of human element of questioning things out of the whole equation, or not?
Well, no, not at all. So once again, these are legal contracts. There's always going to be disputes no matter what happens. And they will still go outside of the blockchain. So you shut down what's happening, and then you would go into the old ways of recourse. So you arbitration, go to court, those kind of things. So,
okay. Yeah. I guess what I was meaning more like, if this happens, then Y happens. If Y happens, and then something else happens. But you know, like it from when I've looked at it in the past, it just looked like it was a much simpler process. Apparently, of course, bring in the human element and everything gets a little more confusing. But it's sort of a yes/no based on the data that's coming in. It's a yes/no outcome, and then it keeps following a very logical, predetermined sort of algebraic path, really, doesn't it?
Exactly. But once again, there's viticating factors. So what I mean by viticating factors is there could be things like before the contract starts, what someone might have lied about, what's called misrepresentation. There's a whole bunch of other things that could cause one party to say, well, actually, we don't like this contract, I want to get out.
Right.
So,
so there's got to be space for flexibility within
there's
that.
still all of that, and that is still happening in the legal space. That's not happening in the blockchain space.
So you've sort of got a marriage of technology and the legal space, but in some ways it's speeding up what some people have called this sort of monolith that's so slow and so expensive and costly. Well, same thing. Okay. All right. So the next question I've got here is, are there legal requirements? Of course, we've touched on that. How do smart legal contracts differ in the physical form to the digital formats? I know we've touched on that, but can you just clarify that?
Yes. So when you enter into a contract, there's a whole bunch of things that are required to actually form a contract. They offer an acceptance. There needs to be consideration, which means there needs to be some form of payment. There needs to be intention to actually do the work. Capacity, so you need to be able to show that number one, that you weren't intoxicated, you weren't under duress when you entered into the contract. There needs to be some certainty, and there needs to be completeness. So this is normal contract law. But when you apply that into a digital space, there is some certain things that need to be looked at in the offer and acceptance, and also the capacity. So with capacity, you're not sure if the person who's signing that contract digitally is intoxicated. So that could come up later, oh, I was drunk, so
null and void.
Null and void. Or did the person have a gun to their head when they were signing that contract?
Would there be some sort of AI that you could use that would do sort of bio-recognition of sweating or heart rate, or I'm just riffing here. But
well, that's kind of where it's heading. So there is services out there that will use the webcam and do some
biorhythmic sort of recognition.
Well, they're just looking at the eyes. Oh, he looks like he could be under duress.
Nothing to do with the fact he just got a phone call from his partner.
Or you could just get into the same room as the person and sign off the same computer as the other party that you're entering into contract, which is basically how things are done these days. Everyone comes to the same place, they all sign it together, they get witnesses, that kind of thing. So this would just be that you would do that on a computer, all the same computer, that kind of thing. Offer and acceptance, there's some differences there in the way that you do the offer. So the offer would probably be tied back to some digital asset. So for instance, with what we're doing with Buildsort is we take the 3D models of the buildings, and you can break that up into, well, here's your scope of works if you're doing the concrete. So if you're sending that out to a subcontractor, we take all the concrete out of the building model, and all of the assets then go into the contractors. This is your scope of work. And if those change, there's variations against those, so we can track all of that as it moves through the contract. Acceptance is a little bit different, once again, because that's also comes into the capacity. How do you sign the contract?
Authenticity of the person signing.
Exactly. So there's just minor things.
They're minor things, but it really feels like a marriage somehow of the traditional system with modern technology. Like modern technology is surging ahead, but we still need to be able to verify some of those human elements, like authenticity and, like you say, capacity and...
Well, so there's also, sorry not to interrupt, there is other kind of legislation out there as well, which we need to worry about, because there's Unfair Contracts Act, which means that we need to be able to edit these contracts. If you have one of these platforms that has, you can only use code to do the smart contract, they're not very editable. So that kind of falls into the standard form contract, which is talked about in the Unfair Contracts Act, where it's kind of like a take it or leave it.
Right.
And if you don't give the opportunity or the ability to be able to edit these contracts, you can kind of fall foul of
with that legislation.
Yeah, so you get into mitigating factors there.
So that's related to what we were mentioning previously about making the forms or the contracts customizable. So they're standard within given parameters, but then there are given circumstances in which you need to add and subtract certain clauses.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. We've talked a lot about smart legal contracts. Are there any other issues or problems that you can mention associated with them? We looked at those human elements of authenticity, or what you call capacity, and a few other things.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about, like the Bar Association of America has brought up a few things, and one of those is like security of data, and how do you make sure that the data that is entered in through these oracles, or even the contract in itself, is kept private? So the beauty of blockchain technology is, it's very secure, and there is different types of blockchain that you can get into. So not all blockchains are totally open.
That was my next question. Yeah.
So a lot of them. So when people associate blockchain, they always think of Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is a totally public network. You can get into private blockchains or even DLTs, which are probably even a little bit better.
So private blockchains are?
They would be like Hyperledger.
Okay, so they're those open source ones, is that right?
Yeah, well, most of these things are open source.
Yeah.
What a private blockchain is means that only certain people have permission to get onto them.
Okay.
So it's not shared with the general public.
Okay. And the DLT, what does that stand for?
So that means distributed ledger technology. So blockchains are distributed ledgers, but not all DLTs they're not all created equally. So with DLTs, you might have a network of people. However, there could be only we do a transaction between you and I, as opposed to everyone else in the same network being able to see it.
Okay. So it's got more of a
so
privacy
even more
aspect.
privacy. Yeah, you can lock it down even further.
Okay, great. In terms of blockchain, that was my next question, because you talked about it being secure, but a lot of people equate the word transparency with blockchain in terms of, the opposite of, say, maybe what we've known in the past with the tampering of data and things like that. But in this case, you're saying that there are different kinds of blockchains, and some of them are literally coded to be more secure and private,
and keep those things private.
Right. And you mentioned that this came up in the US.
Yeah, the Bar Association.
US Bar Association.
So they have been looking at all of these things.
Is there any? Can you talk about what constitutes a good smart legal contract? Good, bad, right, wrong. But and can you automate any kind of clause?
Well, so there's a lot of stuff in a contract that still can't be automated. So you need to, most of the how you act. I forget the word for it. It's basically the preamble in the contract, where all the definitions are placed, and how the parties are supposed to act with each other openly and fairly, and all of those kind of things. They can't be automated. There's nothing in there that an Oracle could enter some data into, and you could come out with some kind of outcome.
So you need human input for that.
So most of these ones the clauses that we can actually automate, they need to have some kind of action. They need to have some kind of event, so something that needs to happen for, X.
Yes.
When X happens, Y.
That algebraic
Y.
formula, yes.
So they could come through notifications. So talking once again about construction, notifications could be we've had bad weather. We want to extend our program a little bit more, and that would go through some kind of workflow to assess if they should be able to claim those delays.
Okay.
New documents come into a platform, so there could be changes. That person's just added that extra floor onto the building, that kind of thing. Things happen in the program, because we can track the whole program. We've got Gantt charts and things like that, and what's happening with the delays. Have we hit certain? Well, we haven't hit certain milestones by certain dates. Those kind of things. Okay. And they could even be like around the agents. So when we say agents, we're talking about representatives within a contract. So
would there be like subcontractors, architects, all the different players?
So with construction contracts, once again, bringing it back to that, there's things called like the superintendent and the superintendent's representative. Now, there's the superintendent's representative is the only one that's able to give certain instructions. And there's only one person allowed to be that person. So, these people go on holidays, they change jobs, all of those kind of things. So you need to be able to reassign.
Right. So what I'm hearing is you've got smart contracts, they're automated, but there needs to be scope for flexibility, because life is not automated. Life is unpredictable. Chris, can you give us an example of a case where a smart legal contract could actually work? Like, we've heard about some amazing use cases in the property and construction industry, but can you put those into actual examples to make it make sense?
Well, so we've talked a lot about construction, but property, there's a lot of use cases in here, because we can tokenise. There's starting to be tokenisation of real estate. There's been work done in South Australia just recently. They're turning properties into what's called a brick. This is like something like, I'm guessing it's like a unit trust or a managed investment scheme. So these things are happening now. It's not it's not the legal profession that's kicking it off. It's actually those in property that are making this disruption.
So that's a bit like what we were saying before, like whether you like it or not, you need to be riding the wave, not getting dumped by it. Like you need to be abreast of these changes.
So tokenisation of real estate is coming in. It's legal in South Australia now.
Wow.
That's happening all around the world. So there's an organisation called Fabri, which is tracking most of these real estate innovations all around the world. There's also things like securities. So, sorry, I will bring it back a little bit to construction. With a lot of these contracts, there's what's called a security that needs to be offered up. So these could be tokenised real estate assets, which could be used within the contract and automatically paid out if certain things happened to different parties, or just held in trust within the blockchain. There is a banking consortium that's got together to also look at the same thing with securities. So I think it's ANZ Bank, Westpac and Commonwealth have got together around creating a blockchain for securities.
So these are Australian companies?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that those securities with the ANZ, Westpac and Commonwealth, are they related to construction and property, or is that something separate again?
It could be any type of contract that they need to enter to offer security over something. So it could be finance security. Okay. It could be security over one of these construction contracts.
So this is a case of where very household names, big names within the banking industry, are putting into place potentially smart legal contracts, which will be affecting all of us. And those smart legal contracts are basically being employed already by these organisations.
Exactly.
So it's not something of future.
It's not a. It's here and now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good example, because I think a lot of people, there are a lot of people questioning why blockchain, why do I need these things, and it's already happening. It's like, why do I need the internet back in the 80s? And here we are, fully reliant. And when you mentioned the securities, the contract, and you talked about the tokenisation of real estate as an asset and that being used in a contract, can you give us an example of where that's happening? And how do the bricks work in that other one?
So, think about first ownership of property. It could be great where, government could step in and you could start owning your house brick by brick. So we've talked about securities. You talked about the tokenisation of real estate and real estate assets and having those used in a contract. Have you got a specific example within the building industry where smart legal contracts are already in play? So they're not in play yet. However, it's only a matter of time. But these can do some amazing things for construction. There's been a lot of changes within what's happening within construction with what's called the Security of Payments Act. That is making sure that all of the different subcontractors actually get paid on time. Uh-huh. It's been one of those industries where it hasn't really worked so well. There's a lot of players that haven't been so honest, and now we have to regulate around that. So those regulations are actually adding administrative costs. There was some reports from the HIA that this security of payments is going to add 1 to 2% of the total project value. So we're talking hundreds of thousands on just administering the contracts with the Security of Payments Act.
So hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra. And the HIA is the Housing Industry of Australia?
Housing Industry Association.
Oh, association.
So there's a lot of administration.
Mm-hmm.
We're having to assess these claims that are coming through quicker than ever. We're also having to dispute them in a rapid amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to do that within a certain time period because what's being proposed in Western Australia is that you aren't able to bring in any more evidence after that period to dispute if it was to go to dispute.
So you've got to get all your
ducks in a row.
evidence. Yeah, right. Yeah,
And you could have claims from up to 60 subcontractors all coming in at once.
Wow.
So there's a lot of administration here. So to have that done in a more streamlined way, this disruption is coming from the construction industry.
Awesome. So like a streamlined, automated way, and that's where you could employ smart legal contracts if this happens, and then that's why, and we go back to our algebraic formula. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Wow, we've covered off a lot of information. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Look, this disruption's coming. The legal industry I think needs to get on board. And yeah, I think they need to come and see TecStack. And
You're one of our TecStack trainers, and it's a real pleasure to have met you here in the beautiful Perth City to be able to discuss this.
No problems. Thanks for having me.
We at TecStack, we have a series of professional trainings coming up, from a 4-hour masterclass explaining what you need to know about smart contracts to an advanced masterclass where you'll build your own smart contracts with no programming skills required. We touched on that in the conversation with Chris. Thanks so much for listening to our podcast, the TecStack podcast. Join our newsletter on techstack.io. That's TecStack with no H, to get updates on all of our courses, our events and news. We'll be back with more hot topics about emerging tech. Tune in to keep your job.